Evening.
Good evening. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Yourself?
Oh, not bad.
Good, good. That's what we'd like to hear. You have plenty of snow?
No, not even cold.
Evening.
Good evening.
How's your ankle?
It hurts a little bit actually, but I've put it up after finished tea. Hello.
Come in for a second. Where do I put on volume? Audio? Yeah, audio. I don't want
It doesn't hurt a lot. But yeah, I'd been stood up for a while cooking. So I've sat on the sofa with my foot in the air like that. And now I've come upstairs to sit on my computer.
Oh.
Hi, Diane.
Hello. Are you all right?
Yeah, everything's good.
Good.
Hi, Dan.
Hello, Katie. Are you all right?
Yeah,
Hello,
I'm good,
Claire.
thanks.
Hiya, good evening, everyone.
Evening.
Good evening.
Hiya.
Evening.
Hi, Steve.
There's someone called Don who's got a canal boat picture behind him. Is that your boat? Very nice.
Obviously not in the UK, is he?
That's a cute little boat if it doesn't go any bigger.
When we got to pick which allotments we wanted because our site was brand new, I could have picked for one close near the gate, but I actually picked one near the canal because I'm afraid my son watched Rosie and Jim when he was little, and so I still do it now. When a boat goes by in summer, I go across to have a look through, and if there's a gap in the trees they can see me through, I do wave at them.
That's a weird bow at the front there, Don. Has that piece been cut out?
Evening, Dan.
Good evening, Paul. I think we're getting a typed answer, Graham.
Oh, okay. I'll see. Yeah.
Good evening.
That would be where your
Good
water tank
evening.
would normally go.
Do you know a lot about boats as well?
Yes.
I do. I used to sail.
I live on one.
You live on one now?
Yes, but it's a lot bigger than that one.
What is it like?
It's a
Britannia?
wide beam. It's not. It's a wide beam. It's 57 foot long, 12 foot wide.
Right.
And it's a houseboat. And I used to have a narrow boat, but that was 58 foot long.
Right. And you had strange women waving at you when you went past the canal?
Oh, all the time.
Allotments.
All the time, especially the allotments. Yeah. I've been down that canal, I think.
Well, now I want to read what he's writing in the chat.
Hello.
Yes, she's.
Good evening.
But it's still good.
Any chance we can start at 6? Because Strictly come down, the skating and ice is on now, isn't it?
Priorities.
I can leave it a couple of minutes sooner than usual, but if I start too early, all I do for the first 5 minutes is like go, because
I've 6 o'clock. Can we start at 6 till 8?
Oh, it's 6. Oh God, no. No.
Go on. We'll pay you.
That's
It's
really
our routine.
difficult. Yeah, 7 o'clock is much better for me, I'm afraid.
You have to watch it on catch up.
No, I don't want to watch it at all.
Oh, you're competing for volume, are you? Have you not got headphones?
Who, me?
Yeah.
That's not me. I'm upstairs.
Oh, you're upstairs. Oh, but you
That's
want
not
to
me.
go and watch the dancing?
No, I don't want to go and watch the dancing. I'd
I'm
rather have a
losing.
longer meeting.
Oh, right. Oh, you
Yeah.
want it to go on for longer. Right,
So
well,
that you don't have to watch it.
Exactly.
I had a meeting on Friday that was booked from 5 till 7, which is absolutely fine because I know it was booked for then. I made sure I had something to eat partway through. But at 7 o'clock, I started chatting to one of the ladies, and it was 8:45 before we shut up. And it's like, that was quite a long session sat at the computer.
Yeah, no.
But not as long as Saturday. Hello, Anne. It was, as some of you might be aware, the BBKA had their annual delegates meeting on Saturday. And it was great fun.
What do they talk about?
All the documents for it are on the BBK website in the members area under whatever the first menu is. And there's reports from all the chairs of the committees telling you what we've done in the last 12 months. And then there's a bit about the election of officers. There's a huge section about the finance, which is always interesting if you like numbers. Then there's the election of the new trustees, the new exam board people, and then there's the propositions bit. And at the end of it, we discussed the neonicotinoids thing. And the lady just coming in now is been, hello, Jenny. Hello, Jenny.
Hi, thank
Talking
you.
about my boat, because I've got a picture of my boat on it. I'm on my B site.
So Jenny was elected as a trustee on Saturday. So we will be having our first meeting on Friday of all the trustees, and that'll be really fun. It really will be fun. So it is 4 minutes past. We will leave it another minute. Has everyone had a lovely weekend? Is anyone actually snowed in? Are you snowed
No.
in, Mike?
It's all
Not
good.
anymore. I was for a couple of days.
Right.
Thursday, Friday. Yesterday was a bit icy. Then it melted.
Where I am, it's still like an ice rink.
Is it? I don't like it slippy.
Yeah, it's really bad.
I don't mind snow when it's crunchy enough to walk in, but the minute it sets overnight, it's not very nice.
You want to get some of them overshoe things that fit under your shoes, the kind of rubber.
I've got
Give
some.
you a grip.
I do have some, and I'm looking forward to being able to put a shoe on my foot. It's not quite at the getting a welly on, mostly because of just the effort you have to go to put a welly on.
You're just trying to avoid the supermarket, aren't you?
No, I'm trying to avoid going out in the really horrible weather to do the chickens. It's been really nice not being out for a few weeks.
Take my video off. So I can't see me eating.
Right. You can keep eating as long as it's cake and you've got enough for everyone. Right, I will get sharing. Let me see what we're doing. Right, there we go. Tonight, I thought we would look at the importance of forage because it's quite an important subject. And there we go. I started too early, and that's one person who's just joined the meeting. So, what do bees forage? Does anyone want to have a guess at the things bees forage?
Pollen.
Yeah.
Nectar. Water.
Yeah.
Propolis.
Propolis, that's it. So what can we see them bringing in when we observe our hive? And we see it's pollen and
propolis.
And propolis, that's it. What can't we see them bringing in? Nectar and water, because they hold that in a honey crop. But they do give us a clue that they're laden down. And does anyone know what that is?
If you shake the flame a little bit, you can get nectar droplets out of it. I don't know if that's what you're going.
No, that's not what I'm after. It's when they come home in a really straight line, because they're not
like
just having a
dementors.
float around. They are coming home because they are absolutely weighed down and they just want to get
They're
in.
like dementors. They're absolutely just kind of zipping in and out like they're like bonkers.
Yeah. When there's a flow on, it's like a solid line of bees doing that. And when they fly in, they're not very good at manoeuvring around you. So if you stand in front of the hive and they're busy bringing things back, you'll get them all sat on you and a bit confused because they knew they were aiming to get home. There we go.
It's short. Is any warm today? Did they need washing?
Right, I am going to mute, or I'm going to just have to work out how to mute everyone. I don't mind you talking, but I can't deal with the noise of general chatter and TV and stuff. So anyway, there we go. That's our list of what do bees forage. And these are all very important things, and we will go through 2 of them tonight. And I'll talk very briefly now about propolis. That's that sticky stuff they get off trees that are conifers and firs. And it's like a resin that's got antibacterial properties, and they use it within the hive, and they can use it to line the cells they're going to lay eggs in and polish them to a fine shine. They can seal little cracks up with it. They can use it as glue to seal roofs down to boxes and things. And when it's warm, it's very sticky. When it's cold, it cracks. And water they use for 2 things: for diluting honey and for temperature regulation. So they can cool the hive down, and they put it inside cells. They can put it in a big globule on their tongues. And when they fan, this gets spread around the hive, and it has a cooling effect. Yes, Graham, you'll have to unmute.
I must be confused here, because I thought the propolis is what they made from their wax glands.
No, that's wax.
I didn't know that. Right, I thought the propolis was wax.
Yeah,
No.
you're confused.
They fill in bigger gaps with wax, but they can mix it with propolis as well, and they can use it to balance the combs so that they resonate at the frequency they want them to do for getting messages through. So it's a really important thing.
So you can't keep the propolis in with your wax waste and that.
When you melt wax down into a big block, the propolis stays at the bottom in a grey layer, and you normally scrape that off and get rid of it.
Right.
And there are some people who collect it.
So the propolis is actually resin that they brought back from the trees and stuff.
Yeah.
Ah, well, there you go. I've learned something there.
Yeah. So anyway, we're going to look at pollen and nectar in a bit more detail. So why do they need pollen? Well, it's the protein. If you think of food groups, then protein's the one that you need to build muscles. And so it's what bees need for making new baby bees. And when they hatch out as young adults, they also stuff their faces with pollen, because it helps their body develop the glands that they then go on to use to do jobs in the hive. And pollen contains all sorts of things. It contains fats and lipids, minerals and vitamins. So it's really good for them. And it's lots and lots of different colours. And you should see, when you observe your hive entrance, different colour pollens going in. And this will vary from day to day. It can vary through the day. You might get different colours in the morning, different colours in the afternoon. And as the seasons go through, you will get a huge range of pollens bringing in. And it adds up to about 57 kilograms of pollen a year for a colony. So you think about how much 57 kilograms is. It's absolutely, it'd be a real struggle to lift that up. So it shows how much they use just to make all those new bees and to feed the bees up. The 2 pictures are, there's the blurry one with 2 types of pollen on. I'm afraid I racked my photos and I don't have very many good ones at the hive entrance. But the second one is of flowering horseradish, and the bees really like that, and that's got an off yellow colour pollen. But you will see them collecting pollen on lots of different plants. And there's a lovely chart. Sheffield beekeepers have got a really nice one. I think North Shropshire have got a nice one as well. And Simon the beekeeper used to do a printed one that he sent out with your first order. And unfortunately, I can't find mine tonight to show you that.
I've got one. I just downloaded it off the internet, and it shows
Right.
all the different colours. It's A4 size and tells you what they are. And I got my daughter to print it off on a colour printer and laminate it for me.
Right. The colours will vary according to how
Yes.
you've printed it, though. But it's an indicator. And the
Yeah.
Sheffield one, you can switch spring and autumn off and just see summer
All right.
colours.
Thorns do a laminated one that goes per month.
Oh,
So
right.
it tells you which. It's quite a small one. It's quite good. If you
Is
flick
it a
it
little
over like
book?
it's on
Almost.
like the corner. It's laminated in the corner, and they do one for disease as well, which is very good.
Yeah. Well, there you go. If you want to buy one, then you can. Now, there's protein in pollen, but it varies from plant to plant, and it actually varies according to how you measure it. And I would assume also the time of day you collect it from the plant or the part of the cycle. It might be that some plants produce really high protein pollen, and then it sort of fades off as the proteins are degraded by UV light, temperature, and all that sort of thing. Or it might be they vary according to weather and how much water and nutrition's in the soil. But plants with higher protein values are rapeseed and almond, and the lower protein ones are blackberry and willow. Sunflower and pine are quite low as well. But it's this spread and it's statistics, and you know, if you analyze your local pollens, you might find them different to these again. But it gives you an idea why bees probably want a varied diet. And if you took them to the almond plantations in America, where the only crop there is actually almonds, then they're only going to get one sort of protein. And the problem with that is it will have a limited range of amino acids. And it would be like you just eating one foodstuff. You probably get quite bored of it. It isn't going to give you all your nutritional value that you need. And we all know eating, they say, don't they, eat the rainbow, eat different colours of things. And I suspect that would be good advice for bees as well. And given the choice, they will go and pick on different plants. If they have a pollen shortage in the hive, they will go and get whatever pollens are available. If they've got plenty of pollen in the hive, they'll go and be much more fussy and only actually pick up higher quality protein pollens. So they're obviously doing what they need to do to make sure the hive's supplied with pollen. So when bees go to flowers, they do pick up pollen because they have lots of hair, and they are incredibly hairy when you look at them. And they get a slight electrostatic charge from flying through the air, I think it is. And that helps pollen stick to them. And when pollen sticks to them, they take it back to the hive, they brush themselves, they collect it all on their pollen holders, and it helps them collect pollen. And the reason bees go to flowers is because they want the nectar and the pollen from them. And the nectar is actually a bribe to bees to go. Stay on that one. So bees are really good pollinators because they'll really concentrate on one type of flower. So if you think about apple blossom, when that's out, the bees that go to that can go from flower to flower on the tree, collecting nectar or pollen, and they will pollinate the other flowers because they will inadvertently be covered in pollen by one flower, and they'll go to another flower and they'll rub that pollen off. And so the bribery bit of it works really well for the plants. The study of pollen in honey is actually really, really important. And it's important from a food standards point of view. And somebody had sent their honey off for testing, and he was accused falsely of having imported the honey because it had quite a rare pollen in. And the guy said, well, I live quite near Kew Gardens. Do you think that's got anything to do with it? So whoever checked the honey checked with Kew Gardens, and indeed they did have this particularly rare foreign flower that his bees had collected the pollen and nectar from, and had made his honey seem as if it couldn't have been from the UK. There are books about the subject. There's some really nice ones with lots of colourful pictures in, or there's more technical guides. And pollens, when you look at them under a microscope, are all sorts of funny shapes. And it's a whole nother subject to get into that we're not going to touch on tonight. But the study of pollen in honey is really useful because it'll point out to the authorities that you have actually imported your honey from wherever, and that it's not British honey. And of course, pollen falls off the bees. And one of the ways it can fall off is when they're transferring it from their back legs into cells to store it. When they collect the pollen, they mix it with a tiny little bit of nectar to make it into a ball and sticky enough to stay on the leg. But it can just fall off through your mesh floor. And if you've got that inspection board in, you can see there's big lumps of yellow pollen there. Or you can deliberately put on a pollen trap, which I'll show you in more detail later after the talk. But this is basically a grid for the bees to come through that has little tiny gaps in it that make the pollen fall off into a trap underneath. And the idea is you put it on for an hour or two one day, and you can collect quite a lot of pollen that you can then freeze and keep for your own bees to use later in the year or the next spring. But not many people do that, and if you do it, you do have to be very careful not to deplete the actual colony's own supply of pollen.
So you can collect your own food ready for kind of March time.
Yeah.
When they start to kind of need the food for the brood.
Yeah. So if you were interested in doing that, this trap was a £5 in the sale at Thorns, but having actually took it out of the wrapper 6 years after I bought it, it's a bit rubbish. And as you can tell from what I just said, I've never actually used it. I'm quite happy that my bees have enough pollen at the right time of the year. Because we live next to the canal almost, there's loads of willow trees and plants available for the bees to go and get nectar on. And the bigger problem here is the weather's just too rubbish for them to be breeding baby bees at that time of year. So we'll move on to nectar. Now, nectar's the carbohydrate, protein's the pollen, but nectar is the thing that gives them the energy. And just like us, if they don't have any energy, they'll just sit in the corner until they die. And because they don't hibernate, they need enough to get them through the winter. But they need it to store safely. So what they do is they evaporate it down to less than 20% water, and then they cap it with a beautiful wax cover, and that stops the water being absorbed into it, so that when they come to uncover it and uncap it, they can start diluting it with water and eat it as food. If they don't have enough, they'll die, and if they end up at the wrong side of the hive, they'll die. So the capped stuff is really important for them, and you'll notice on lots of frames when you're doing your inspections, they'll have open areas that are either in use as food sources or in the process of being evaporated down. And you'll know in your supers, they will fill them up and then they'll cap them. And sometimes you can take a frame out and it's not capped at all, and you can shake it and not a drop comes out, and they are going to start capping it as soon as they've got time. When they're very busy in the middle of summer, in the middle of a flow, they don't get round to capping everything quite as quickly as you'd like. But nectar is really, really important, and it's really important for us as well, because otherwise we'd just be keeping insects that stung us. But because they make excess, we can take some of that and enjoy it ourselves. But it is a bribe, as I said before, because the plants want pollinating. And so they produce nectar to encourage bees and other pollinators to come in and visit the plants. And they are hairy, and lots of other insects are hairy, electrostatic. They'll go en masse to pollinate crops. And because bees are really good at sticking to the same sort of flower, they do pollination really, really well. Now, this bribery thing is really interesting. The pollen on the flowering globe artichokes is almost luminous. It's absolutely amazing. So if you've got any of those, and normally you cut them off and eat them, then I'd suggest leaving one to flower and then seeing what the bees look like on it, because they are absolutely gorgeous. The balsam is blatant at forcing the bees to accept pollen, because they're cut like flower. It hides the nectar right at the bottom. The bees have to go right in, and the plant goes, right, we're going to rub our nectar all over you. So the bees come home covered in white pollen off the balsam. It's a really good tactic for them, because that bee doesn't just go to one flower and then go home. It'll go to one flower, then the next flower, then the next flower. It'll do absolutely loads, and that makes it a really successful plant in terms of producing viable seed. And that's why normally if you have a small patch of balsam, the bees find it the year after it will be bigger, because the bees have benefited from getting a crop off it, and also they'll have helped the plant by making the seed better. So getting a good crop, because this is the bit that shouldn't be the be all and end all of your beekeeping, but it is one of the signs that you've done most things right. And it takes thorough planning. You need good bees, regular inspections, good colony management, because there's no point just inspecting your bees every week and not actually taking any notice of what you've seen. You need to get your swarm control right, and you need to have the right apiary location. So planning, what are your plans for this year coming? Have you got enough kit? When should you stock up on kit? And you might have heard me say several times before, the time to stock up on kit is winter. The time to not stock up on kit as an emergency is summer, when everyone else has forgotten to get enough supers, and you think, oh, it's all right, I need another super making, I'll go and get one. I'll have to go and order it off the internet. And you order it, and it turns out it's going to be 4 weeks before they can deliver it, in which case your bees will vastly run out of room very, very quickly. So you need to have the kit in hand, which means having a plan on what you're going to do. If you start with one hive, you should bank on having at least 2 by the middle of summer, and it really doesn't ever hurt to have extra kit. If you've got a nuke box sat somewhere and it turns up, a swarm turns up and lands in it, and you haven't got any kit to put it in, then you'd feel a bit sad having to pass it on to someone else. So order some extra kit. There's nothing better than getting those big boxes full of frames and boxes, and then the joyful bit is actually building it. And what would happen in a normal year is your association would no doubt organise workshops where you can learn how to put things together right. This is Nick doing a workshop at my old bee club a couple of years ago, and we hired the scout hut, we put lunch on, and we got about 10 people to come and learn how to put kit together. So as you can imagine, when everyone was having a go at making frames, it was pretty noisy. But people learnt how to put the boxes together, how to make sure they're square and level, and that they were doing it right. We actually had someone come along with a box they'd put together for Nick to disassemble and put together properly, because they hadn't worked out how to, the gap for putting the frames in. So it really pays to have help putting together your first box and paying attention and getting it right each time. Because if your boxes don't sit flat and level, then you're creating spaces the bees can rob. But we had lots and lots of fun that day. It's a really good activity. And sadly, it's not going to happen this spring. I don't know whether some associations are going to try and do it virtually. I know Paul has actually done a video of making frames that I think we've all watched at least once, haven't we,
If I
Paul?
may interrupt, the Thorns website has got some really good videos. Last year I put together some gabled roofs, which you know, is not for the faint-hearted, and their videos are spot on.
Yeah, And that's it. I think however you get help, whether you have someone in your family you can bubble with who's good with a hammer, it's really important to get it right.
I found the Thorns videos missed some of the really important nuances that you get when you're doing it with somebody else who's done it before, because they seem to leave quite a lot of assumed knowledge.
Right. I helped Oliver St. John when he put his National Hive Building booklet together. He gave it me to look at, and I had a look through it, and I said, you've just said there, square the boxes. I don't do woodwork, so I don't know what you mean by square the boxes. So Nick wrote him some sentences to include, so his instructions then included a bit more detail on how to get the things square. And it is dead simple when you know how, and if you think about it, you probably have worked it out. But just being faced with a woodworking instruction sometimes doesn't help. I don't think you can beat having someone actually show you or guiding you through the process. And you might be lucky enough to find someone who'll do it at 2 meters. I suspect very few of the clubs are going to do anything this spring, though, just because of the COVID situation. But they might be doing videos like Paul's done. Paul did his frame making one, and I thought that was really good. Yes, Graham.
I'm just wondering why he's got a drill there, because I've watched the videos on Thorns more than once because I've got mine to build.
He's a perfectionist.
Oh, get Steve to answer it.
You don't need a drill, surely.
He doesn't like the idea of hammering in nails into tiny sticky out bits like that, whatever they're called. I can't think what they're called.
I had trouble with some of my Thorns kit just using the nails. And I built it a week before Steve said about he screws his, so I wish I'd drilled little holes and screwed.
Yeah, pilot holes help, I think, with the small edges.
The wood with screws, but if you're using nails,
you can use screws.
I screw mine together, and it's so much better to screw together.
Even with the nails, even with the nails going, you hit a
that looks like a frame,
wood and it just bend.
That's actually the edge of one of the side rails on a box. But if you drill a pilot hole, it's really neat. And Nick's really, really neat. His woodworking is absolutely amazing.
Well, yeah, if you're using screws, I can imagine. I mean, I would as well.
No, he nails them, I think.
Graham,
so
they were hitting the knots in the wood and bending and coming out at different angles.
If you split a lug, then you split it. Whereas if you've pilot drilled it, then the bit you're nailing it into is bigger than the bit you've drilled your pilot hole through. And so that's just helpful. That's just what Nick does. I'm sure other people do different things. Do you make your own boxes, Jenny?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It stops the wood splitting if you do a pilot hole first when you do nail it.
Would you use a bigger nail?
No, well.
No, use a finer bit.
You use a finer bit than the nail you're going to use, yeah.
Yeah.
But you make a pilot hole and then you can hammer it together.
Yeah.
If you screw them, when you come to undo them, they're actually more difficult to, if you've got to do repairs, if you've screwed things, you stand more chance of damaging the wood afterwards.
So do you ever take them apart when you've nailed?
Yeah, if I've got to.
I
use glue as well, so the glue's better than any of it.
Yeah.
We nail ours. I use the Voil weed there. I don't make boxes. Nick does that. I'm quite happy making frames, but the accuracy and precision needed, I'm very much at that'll do for sort of anything big like that. Whereas the frames are quite easy to get right, I think. Once you've done your first 100, you get quite good at it anyway. But the pilot hole just saves you having the embarrassment of having that split, and then you've got to work out how to sort it out. And I'm definitely not good enough at woodwork to sort it out. I'm sure Steve and maybe Mike would probably be able to do that, no problem. But it just saves you having the problem of that.
I wish I'd discovered it before I built mine. The Thorns kit was a nightmare.
Yeah,
I find the polystyrene is easy to put together.
It's the best.
A bellow comes ready built. I'm ready painted, and I quite like the bellow ones just for that.
Yes, yes, very
I
good
love my
value.
bellow.
Yeah, I don't like painting, and I really like the pink they do that Katie's got now. I think that's absolutely lovely.
Is that for your hair or for the hive?
It's
for both.
Yes, it's for Katie's hair, not for mine. So anyway, get your kit built in plenty of time. And lots of people buy stuff in the sales, and then by the start of February, they're ringing the supplier up crying because it hasn't arrived, because the season's nearly started. Well, it hasn't. It really hasn't. And you've probably got until the end of March, really, before you start having to worry about supers and things.
Just one quick thing, Diane.
Go on.
I see you're showing all the wooden hives, but I've recently used 2 polystyrene hives for the winter.
Yeah.
And I feel much more confident that they're going to keep the bees safer.
They will eat more in a poly hive. I have won a bellow. I'd bought a Payne's hive, and I didn't even assemble that actually. My husband claims he didn't assemble it, but it arrived flat pack and it was then assembled, and he claims he didn't do it, and I'm fairly confident I didn't do it either. But it isn't quite compatible with all the wooden national kit, and so I sold it to someone who actually had other of that type. The bellow though is you can mix and match that to your heart's content. It's much better, I think.
The Maysmore one seems to be quite good for mix and match as well.
The one
I've
the
got
ones
a
I've got was it Spenty?
Yeah.
Spenty?
Yeah. I've just only got one poly hive, and to be honest, as it was in a bellow, watching me assemble that would just be a picture of me opening the box, because it's already done. I do have a picture of what happened to the crown board after I put it in the steamer, though. I don't think you were with us for the melting wax talk, Jonathan, but they don't like steam. It looks like a parabola now. It's quite an interesting shape. So anyway, we will carry on. Get your kit done for the start of the season. Even if you've not built it all, then you can spend some time in April building kit. So the next bit is do regular inspections and write it down. And this is the BBK hive recording system that you can download and print out. And it's got everything on it you need to record. It's got a date. Did you see the queen? Are there any queen cells? What's the brood? Are there enough stores? Is there enough room? What's the health like? Is there anything dodgy? Have you seen a chalk brood in there? Are there any signs of varroa? Have you counted for varroa? What's the mood like? What feed have you put on? How many supers have you put on? What's the weather like? And then notes. And if you keep a record of that, you're effectively answering Ted Hooper's 5 questions. And they're really, really basic things to be looking at every time. But if you record this information and you do that on a regular basis through the season, then you're going to know when your bees need feeding in June. If you've took a super off, if you were lucky enough to get a spring crop and you take a super off, they might need feeding in June. You might realise they need a varroa treatment and have to look at the appropriate one.
Diane?
Yeah.
The Ted Hooper books mentioned, I think it was one you recommended, and I went on Amazon and bought, recommends only doing the full inspection when it's 17 degrees or higher, I think it said.
I think we say 14 now, don't we? 14 or 15.
I was going to say we'd never get in up north.
No.
Never, ever get into
Lorraine
bed.
would never see hers.
Yes, it's like the optimum queen mating temperature is 23, and someone did an average over Scotland and discovered one year there was one day on which queens could have adequately mated. And as lots and lots of queens had adequately mated at other days, we have to assume the temperature they can get round. I think the issue of going in at a cool temperature is you've got to be a bit quicker, and the bees can be much narkier when it's cold. Which is why I think it's important to write down the weather. And actually, if you've got a thermometer in your apiary, write that down as well. And then you actually make the effort of saying, oh, it's only actually about 13 degrees.
So anything above 14, we should be okay to a full inspection. Otherwise, just keep it quick and
Yeah, and people say t-shirt weather. Well, I'll probably have a jumper on in June still. So, you know, don't look to me for t-shirt weather, because it's actually got to be quite warm before I take the jumper off.
Our postmen have still got shorts and t-shirts on, so
I know. This is it. I know someone who used to be out on the allotment in frost in just a t-shirt, and it's like he's clearly got a blood pressure issue there, I think. But yes, the write it all down, do your regular inspections through the season. And then the question about, have you got good bees? Are they calm and easy to handle, and are they productive? And some people place more emphasis on the productive nature of their bees than whether they're calm. And I think that's the wrong thing to do. If you don't enjoy beekeeping, it doesn't matter if they give you 1 million gallons of honey. You've got to enjoy it, I think, for the actual hobby bit.
And the productive bit, it must depend on the forage availability.
It will. And there will be years productive bees will not do very well just because it's been too dry, too hot, and then too wet. And it'll interrupt their brood rearing as well as their ability to go out and forage. But being calm and easy to handle and nice for your neighbours, I think, is absolutely vital. And people often say, I've not got swarmy bees. And what it quite often means is they're not very good at having a proper eye out in the garden and seeing a cluster of bees sat in the hedge looking at them. So swarm management and control, if you give them enough space and you make sure they've got enough room for brood and for bringing nectar in, and you give them some wax to draw at the right time, you clip the queen, then it delays when you actually have to do some proper swarm control, which is then your Pagden with the head add-on, whether you remove a queen right nuke, you do a Snell Grove or a Demery. You have to take all of this into account. If you don't do the left-hand side, you will have to do the right-hand side sooner. And some years you can do all the stuff on the left-hand side and they just won't swarm because they know the season's not right. If the weather's really funny, they're not desperately keen to, surprisingly enough, to go off and make a new home in a tree. But we will be covering swarm control at great length on several sessions before you actually have to do it this year. So, and if all else fails, of course, you go and collect the swarms. And it will be usually, hopefully, other beekeepers' swarms you go and collect. So you will hopefully manage your own bees well enough. But you might be lucky enough to go and collect some absolutely massive prime swarms and get some free bees. And hopefully they'll be nice and calm and productive as well. But they're not always. And so that's something else to think about. If you collect a swarm, and even if it's one of your swarms, and they're just a bit tetchy, then think about sorting out a new queen, which your local association should be able to help you with. But this one on the wall here was one of my favourite ones. And the lady stood in her back window in a terrace house and watched us collect that. And she came to the back door as we were finished. And she declared she'd not had so much fun for quite a long time as watching us collect that. And integrated pest management. This is the graphic from a few weeks ago.
Sorry.
It's all right, Sarah. So the top bit is the biotechnical bits, and these are the things you can do with supers on, which is always good to know. So that's the queen trapping, which is when you put the queen in a special cage and move her between frames and get rid of the sealed brood. You can do drone brood removal. You can do artificial swarming and do a special putting a frame in for all the varroa to leap into. The minute it's sealed, you take that frame away. And that can be quite effective as a way of controlling varroa in the summer. And you can use your open mesh floor all year round. The only treatment option you have when you have supers on, though, is max. And so that's the really important thing to remember. If you need to treat for varroa in the summer when your bees are collecting honey, that is the only one you can use. The purple ones are organic acids or oils, and the blue ones are pesticides. they are usually much longer treatments to pesticides, and I don't particularly like them. I much prefer things like the Max, the Apibioxal and the Thymol Apiguard, which is an autumn one that's got a lovely smell to it. But if you were foolish enough to put it on with supers, you would taste it in the honey because it's very strongly scented. As is the Apilife Var one, which is a mixture of very smelly essential oils. And you can use some of these in spring, but the risk is if you use them in spring, the time they have to be on, you may need to put a super on. And the minute you need to put a super on, you're not allowed to have that chemical on. And so whilst it does say spring in the literature that comes with them, I think you'd have to really think very carefully about whether that's suitable for your bees. And they're much better used in the autumn, but they all come with really detailed instructions. And you should always follow the
Apibioxal for winter. When I read it, it looked like you could do it in kind of like March as well, before there was brood on there. Is that still classed as winter, or?
It probably is, and you can use that one twice. So you could use it as
like
your
Christmas and March or something.
Yeah, but you wouldn't want to use it if there was a super on.
No.
And it is one you could use on a swarm. And I think one of the other oxalic acid ones actually talks about being used on swarms. And that might actually be the OxyB one. But it's specifically mentioned in the instructions. But it has to say you can use it twice. Otherwise, you are restricted to one use. And you are legally obliged to keep a document listing your medicines that you've used on them. So you need to keep your varroa under control, because otherwise your bees won't be healthy enough to bring you any honey. So that's...
Sorry,
go on.
to interrupt you. Do you treat 4 times a year then for varroa?
No. I monitor 4 times, and then I treat as necessary. But I'll tell you what I've done this last year. I used Max last year, and I didn't use a Thymol one. And I said it earlier in the year, I'm going to do Thymol, and I just didn't get around to ordering it. So I used a Max at the end of summer because they needed a varroa treatment. So rather than ordering the Thymol one, taking 4 weeks. The problem we have here is because of the balsam. If you put an econ to put your Thymol Apiguard treatment on, they will fill it with comb, and they will fill that with nectar, and it can be really messy. So it's always this challenge between putting the Thymol on while the temperatures are going to stay okay, but after the peak of the balsam, and it's quite difficult to manage. So this last year I just used Max. There should be an Apibioxal treatment going on, but unfortunately I've not been able to trot down to the apiary. So we might be a little bit late with that. So that might be something that comes back to bite me.
So do you religiously treat at any time, or do you always monitor and decide?
I like to say I monitor. I might not with the Apibioxal, but I should go and get someone to put the boards on now, so that when I can actually get my welly on in a few days, I can go and have a look what the fall is.
So that was my impression. You had to take opportunity when they had no brood. This would be the most effective time to whack in something, and then I thought you would probably need to treat by the end of summer, and then the other times you would just check.
The advice is you should check and treat if they need it, but then you have to take into account the problems with checking, and if it's really windy, it blows all the varroa off. And it's a really complex subject, because these are chemical drug treatments, and you are supposed to follow the instructions. And if the instructions say only use on a high varroa, because each of these will have an effect on the bees. So if you did 4 treatments a year and your bees didn't need it, you might be doing more harm to your bees than the benefit of actually getting rid of a little bit of varroa. And the people who don't treat at all just live with colony loss. I think that's the thing to note. If you don't treat for varroa, then your colonies either die completely, and I saw someone on Facebook saying they had lost a colony and they wondered whether it was a late supersedure that hadn't worked, and that you can autopsy the hive. And I'm looking at whether I can prepare a talk on that, but I've only got a couple of photos of dead outs, so I'd have to borrow loads of pictures for that.
Sorry, I don't treat.
Do not treat at all.
At all. And the conversation I always find interesting is the members of my association that do all the treatments at the right time, in the right way. When they lose their colonies, they can't explain to me why they've lost their colonies.
Unless you've watched someone apply a treatment and been there when they've took it off, then there's a million variables in between. Absolutely. About whether treatments have been used right. And that's why I always say, you know, get the instructions, read the instructions, underline the important bits, go back and read them again. What do you need to do to do the treatment successfully? And then you are supposed to measure how effective it's been. In the weeks after the treatment, you should get a really high fall. And if you don't, it might be because the treatment's not worked, and it might be you need to go and check the date and batch number. And you can report adverse reactions from drugs just like you can human ones. You can go to, I assume it's on the VMD somewhere, you can say, I used this and I got no varroa fall, and I know there's varroa in my bees because they died 4 weeks later, and give them the batch number, and they can go back to companies and say, can you check this batch number? And I suspect a lot of it's user error because people aren't very good at following what are supposed to be simple instructions, but having gone through each sheet they attach to them all, they're hideously complicated, some of them. You know, apply to the top of the hive in a southwesterly facing wind whilst you stood on your left leg with your finger in your ear. It may as well say, and you're remembering that at the bottom of the garden after having read it 3 weeks before and thought, oh, I must get around to using it. If you don't follow the instructions properly, you're not going to get good results.
No, but one of the people that I met when I first started beekeeping was Ron Hopkins.
Oh, right, yeah.
And I went down to see Ron down at Swindon. What an amazing man. And he doesn't treat his bees.
No.
No. And there is, I mean, they're poo-pooing all the data now, but basically it was the fact that the colonies, it was more to do with the virus in the varroa mite rather than the amount of varroa you've got in your colonies, because you could incubate your colonies by having varroa from getting the wrong disease varroa mite.
Yeah, it's to do with chronic bee paralysis virus 1 and 2, wasn't it? Have you read the Steve Martin BBK booklet about basically resistant bees? And there's a map of various areas in the UK that have varroa resistant bees, and the issue seems to be if you move those varroa resistant bees to areas with high levels of varroa, they don't survive, and it might be because they suddenly get a big dose of the other CBV virus or whatever.
Yeah, I see. Sorry, go on. Sorry,
it's just a very, very complex subject. But Steve Martin's got a request for citizen science for people to look at the uncapping and recapping rates in their hives if people are interested.
I mean, this year I've gone into, this is my 5th year. So this year I've gone into winter with 18 colonies. And at the moment I still have 18 colonies because I checked them all today.
Yeah.
And I always feel more comfortable understanding how I've lost them, rather than doing all the treatments and still losing them.
Yeah,
I
think
right.
some of it is, from what I've seen, people having not fed their bees enough. Yeah. And there's a beekeeper near me who I had a chat with one year, and I said, oh, I'm going to go and heft my hives and feed them. And he said, I don't feed mine because if they haven't put enough stores away, and he doesn't take loads of supers off, he says they're not thrifty enough for where we live. And he's sort of got a point.
Yeah.
You know, we live in a fairly cold, wet area, and if they're not good at packing their brood box with stores, then they're probably not very good bees for around here. And it seems really harsh, but lots of people who don't treat will lose. When they started not treating for varroa, people were losing massive numbers of bees. They might lose 90% of their colonies. And the risk being when you've only got one or two, that's devastating. And you then have to go and buy more bees. And there's nothing worse as a new beekeeper paying out for bees every year or having to wait till someone will give you a swarm. So until you've got to the number you're comfortable with of hives, then I'd say, you know, read all the stuff about not treating and take advice and have a really good think about it. And it applies each time you come to look at your hives. You know, assess them. Do they need treating, or can you leave it till spring? And then, because you can use max virtually all year once it gets warm enough.
A lot of people have taken that, what is it, Leon Sashkin, his advice, and it's survival of the fittest.
Yeah.
So he doesn't treat or anything either.
No, but if you've only got one hive, and survival of the fittest means your hive doesn't survive, you then aren't a beekeeper. You have an empty hive, and it's really important to know about disease and not just varroa, so that you can check them for foul brood, because foul brood's the really devastating one. Yeah, varroa will kill a colony, but foul brood you could quite easily spread amongst all your colonies, and then they'd all die. And so
yes.
It's just important to keep on top of measuring, I think, which is why in the big year chart we did, we put in count your varroa 4 times a year. And I suspect lots of people only count twice and maybe just go and do a treatment at the time they've bought the stuff for. But really you should be going and doing that count. And that's about making sure your colonies are going to be thriving enough to bring you in a crop. And if you're not bothered about that and you don't mind having 6 bees in a box holding hands, then, you know, don't worry about treating them, but they will never do very much, and they'll just die.
Last year, my best colony last year was a colony that I'd forgotten about in a beehive that I used to use as an apiary for 2.5 years. And I kept seeing these boxes nearly every day, thinking, I've got to go and get them. I've got to go and get them. And eventually I went to get them in April, just before we locked down, March, just between March and April, when we were locking down, and I opened up the roof and it was full of bees.
Yeah.
So I had to go back in the evening, lock them in, and it was wall to wall bees the whole summer. It was my biggest colony and it was the most productive colony. I never saw the queen. I did about 4 or 5 really good checks on it. And even I even put a new box in. I took them out and never saw the queen. Just saw loads of brood, loads of honey, loads of bees.
Yeah.
And I hadn't got in there for 2.5 years.
So do you live quite near Ron?
I live in Windsor.
Right.
So Ron's in Swindon, which is about 45 an hour, about an hour away.
Yeah.
But they broke into his apiary this year, didn't they? Last year.
Yeah.
But they destroyed it, didn't they?
Yeah, I'd seen it on Facebook.
He's an interesting man. He's a very interesting man.
Yeah, I believe so. I've read stuff he's written. But yeah, if you're going to do proper varroa control, these are the lists of the chemicals and what their active ingredients are and when you can do them. But the things you can do with Superzon is really limited because you're not allowed to contaminate your honey. So we will go on to the next slide, which is very nearly at the end of it, I think. The right apiary location.
Can I sorry, what about contaminating the wax? Some of them do contaminate the wax.
They do, and it is the ones in this one, and I can't remember which ones it is, but I should probably put an arrow, a star on it. It was in my varroa talk. But again, it comes to reading the instructions, and there were the 2 of these, and whether it was actually the flumethrin or the amitraz, I can't remember, but it basically said do this before you do a full comb change. So these would be autumn treatments before the next year you plan on doing a shut swarm or a Bailey comb change. But that's just something to build into your hygiene, and changing your brood combs every 3 years is what the NVU recommend. The right apiary location might be a lot more difficult for some people. Needing plenty of forage all year round for both pollen and nectar, and not too many hives in one area. There's been a lot of discussion about the number of hives in London over the last 6 months, and somebody had done some research and they'd worked with London beekeepers, and the problem is there are areas of London that don't have millions and millions of trees. They are lots of concrete roads and pathways and things, lots of housing, and there's not huge acreage of forage. And the problem is then the bees struggle, and if they struggle, they're more vulnerable to being got at by the little viruses and things that might not bother them otherwise. If they have varroa and they're really well fed with really good quality ranges of pollen, then they might get through that better. But the minute their nutrition's endangered, then so are they. And so it really pays to see what you can do to improve the forage in your local area. And that means you can pest your local councillors to ask if you can plant some spring bulbs. Things like snowdrops and crocuses, they're lovely in spring, and you can always say, we'd like the area to look nicer. Do you mind if this grass verge is sown with wildflower seed, or we put spring bulbs in it? And quite often some of them will chip in their little private budgets. The council allocates them for their areas. And as long as you're prepared to go with someone with a spade and dig holes in the ground and throw the bulbs in, you can get bulbs planted for your bees. And that's really, really useful. There's absolutely tons and tons of work being done at the moment about trees. And if your area doesn't have a tree-based charity at the moment trying to plant more trees, then I'd be very surprised. But you can ask your local council about its tree policy. And ours are really good in Oldham. They plant Mahonia along the middle of the big roads, and that's really good in late winter. It has some pollen on. And they're quite good at planting bee-friendly trees. The council came and planted 3 trees on the grass verge in front of my house. And I emailed the guy at the council, the arborist, and said, what are these trees that are being planted outside? And he said, oh, they're hawthorns. And it's like, well, they'll do. They're not the best in the world for bees, but they're better than nothing. And the birds will like them as well. But if you can get an ear of a councillor, you might be able to influence them to some really bee-friendly trees. And there's a list on the BBK website of bee-friendly trees. So if you can convince your council to plant more in your area, then that would be fabulous. But you can plant things in your garden. Not everyone's got room for a tree, but you can probably fit a shrub or 2 in. And Hebe's really good. And there's loads of flowers in the autumn that can be quite interesting. And ivy is really, really good for the winter, but it needs to be quite old and on a south-facing wall before it'll flower.
When the bees take the nectar from a flower, say,
yeah,
the flower reproduces that nectar, doesn't it? It's not just a one-off thing.
No, but the time of day they refill is different and can vary from type of plant to type of plants. So it might be the flowers, some flowers produce it in the morning, the bees go and work that in the morning, then in the afternoon they go and find a different plant.
But will they reproduce it almost every day?
Yeah, some will keep producing more. The problem is if it doesn't rain very often, then the nectar dries up because the plant needs moisture to make nectar. And the nectar they do make is really sticky and thick because there's not enough moisture in the root system to push it through. And And if it rains too much, the plant itself gets washed out and any nectar there can get washed away and diluted. But it also means the amount of water coming up the root system, if the plants can't control that very well, just because, you know, everything's soaking wet, then it'll make such dilute nectar, there's almost no food value for the bees. And some plants will tell you when they are out of, well, they'll tell a bee when they are out of nectar. And I think that's clover, horse chestnut, and forget-me-nots. And it's the forget-me-not, I think, is a white circle around the middle bit of the flower and it goes to yellow, or it starts yellow and goes to white. But these are visible signals that the bee can pick up on, that they know not to go to that.
All right, because I'm gonna put some flowers in down on my allotment for the bees. So I'm still trying to decide which ones will be the best to keep replenishing them. I mean, I've got fruit trees.
Any of my bees, it's always bumbles and things that are in my garden. I've got a garden full.
Because your honeybees fly further away.
Yeah.
They're really rubbish at navigating 10 meters. They just don't find things in their patch. They'll go up in the air and look for something, you know, half a mile away.
Right.
Yeah, my garden was full of other things.
Like your flowers might help my bees.
Yes.
I've got loads of fruit trees, you see, and I'm hoping that they're going to apple trees, pear trees, and plum tree, and I'm hoping that they're going to pollinate them well. But that they're only a few meters from the hives. But
they might find them. They might not. If there's a lot of flower in one place, that's very attractive to bees.
That's the thing with gardens, isn't it?
Yeah,
you don't have enough. You have one of this and one of that. What you want is a complete stand of something.
Yeah.
And make it spring or autumn. Forget summer, there's plenty of that.
Yeah,
because when
late autumn.
If they fly up, they're right in front of them. So almost,
the problem is, even if they find it, they've got to go back into the hive and tell the other bees there's this really great source of nectar, and they're just not very good at doing the waggle dance for very short distances. So that's the problem. If they come out and find it, that'd be fine, but they might just be too close. Other bees will find it, and it might be, you'll see honeybees on it, but they're not yours. And you just won't know unless you're really good at watching them and you can watch which way they disappear. What bees do, the research says, when they find a field of something, they join the field at the same point every time they visit it. And they'll land at this point and they'll go through the field, and then they'll come back to that point and leave. And then they'll come back into the field at that point. And whether it's because that way they know where they got to, whether it's just that's how their navigation works to bring them back to this same point. So, but Mark's absolutely right. If you plant very early spring things or late autumn, because during the summer, if you don't have enough forage during sort of May, June, July and August, really, if there's not enough forage for your bees then they shouldn't be in that area, because there should be lots of other plants. If you're in an absolute desert somewhere, you would need to provide everything. And this is why they have migratory beekeeping in the US, because in California, they have these huge almond farms and they weed kill underneath. So there are no wildflowers even. So the only diet the bees have when they go there is the almond blossom, because they want a really good crop and they don't want the bees distracted or going anywhere else. So it is all they can do. But that means as soon as those flowers finish, they have to put them all back on a truck and take them to their next job. So it's a really crap diet for the bees for 3 weeks, and then they go on a long journey and do it all again with a different.
Yeah, that's just pure commercialism, isn't it?
Yeah.
And Michaelmas daisies are good for the autumn because you get masses of flowers. They flower for a long time late in the autumn. They look good. The bees love them. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And if you have a variety of them, 2 or 3 different kinds of Michaelmas daisies, it spreads the flowering a little bit over the.
There are charts that say whether it's pollen and nectar, and quite often in the autumn, I think it's only really ivy that they get nectar off. There's lots of things that they'll be able to get some pollens off. There is a leaflet listed on, well, there's a couple of leaflets on the BBKA about planting. I will put these links on my Facebook page very, very shortly.
There's been a few links put up that people have put up on in the chat part.
Yeah.
Is this some way that you see that one from Mikhail? I can't read the name.
Just click on it and save it.
Yeah, I suppose I could really. I'm not sure if I know how to do that. I just wondered if there's somewhere where
digital angels, whatever they're called, that they help you.
Is that on my
Just
page?
press on it and you copy the message.
Yeah, just copy the link and save it to your favourites, Graham.
Copy it to where? I don't know, lose it.
Yeah, that was an inspection report I put up there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Copy it into your notes or into your internet browser, and then you'll have a history.
You're assuming I know what I'm doing here, don't you?
Even into a Word document, you could copy the link in and paste it into internet later.
I'm with you, Graham. They're talking their language. It's like that squaring of the hives bit earlier. Oh, just
Yeah,
copy
yeah.
it into your browser. Do what?
Yeah.
You can save the chat.
Oh, it's the loads of things in the chat. I get a copy of the chat when I finish recording. It saves it. And I do look at them sometimes. I looked at the last, because obviously while I'm talking, you're all having a really good chat in there, and I can see the little thing go, bing, there's messages. But if I stop and read that, I lose my place. But
Yeah,
I've just seen that. Yeah, right-hand
somewhere,
click on chat.
Can you? Is there a corner on the on your Facebook page that you could put these on? You see, if I right click on that, it says select all. I don't know how much it's going to select.
I will cut and paste
the whole
it,
chat.
and we will. Oh, actually, no, I've got to do it in Word because it wouldn't let me delete things.
Are you running Windows, Graham?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm using a Mac, so I press Command and Shift and 3, and it just saves the screen. So when somebody puts up three or four like addresses of websites, I just press Command Shift and number 3, saves it as a screenshot, and then when we've all finished tonight, I'll go back, look at my screenshot, click on it, go back to the website. Not sure how you can do that on Windows, but it's quite easy to do on a Mac.
I don't know.
We'll all get Mac, Steve. I'm with you, mate.
You obviously run a Mac as well then, Chris.
All about mine.
I'll tell you what, if you want to buy me a Mac, I'll use one. But I'm a Windows girl, I'm afraid.
Rubbish.
They are. It is rubbish.
I can't use PCs. I can only use Macs. It's really bad.
Yeah, deconditioning.
I have pasted the link. The link he pasted was a link to the Hive record sheet, which if you type Hive record into the BBK website search box.
Oh yeah, I've got one of them. Yeah.
Yeah, that's all.
There's a few references to the Sheffield beekeepers. And then
but I've
there was
added
one,
the link for that.
There was one reference to an app, a B+ app.
Turning into an IT chat rather than a beach.
I know. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to do that.
If you launch them, you should be able to save them as favourites in Internet Explorer.
Yeah. You should. That's already sounding very complicated for someone who doesn't know what he's.
If you go to the far right hand corner in the chat, there's 3 dots. One of the options there is save chat.
Oh, it is. Well spotted.
That then becomes a folder, and you could do that after every meeting if you wanted to, and you've got them forever.
Where's these 3 dots?
On the top right hand corner.
If
bottom right hand is the chat.
Christ, my slider's going up and down here like a.
I think this will echo my screen there.
Save chat.
Send me a screenshot.
Oh, I think I've lost you. Oh God.
That might be me messing. I don't know. Let me stop sharing. Yeah, a screen grab's probably better, isn't it? In the bit you type the messages, Graham. At the far right of that, there's a little document picture that says file, and next to it's a very thin grey circly line square with 3 dots
chat.
in. That's your save chat.
Right.
Thank you, Heather, for spotting that.
Oh, where's it gone now?
It'll save it wherever it's set to save. I don't know.
Okay, right. I'm sorry
if
to
you then
interrupt.
click file, it has that file and it'll have today's date.
So I think Heather's done
On the
this
bottom
before.
line, Graham, it'll be on the bottom line, just beside where you press.
Heather, do you want to do a Zoom meeting on this?
My charges are very reasonable.
You know, you're talking about trees. Countryfile have got a really good app about people planting trees.
Oh, right.
Called plantbritain.co.uk, and it's free. And you can go on there and you can see where people are planting trees and flowers and plants and also and veg and everything else in the country.
Right. I have got a link to, and it will be me finding it, to, I should have included it tonight actually. It's a map of what crops get planted where, but I will have to just look it up because I can't remember what it is.
Are you going to put it in chat?
I will do. No, I'll share it first and see if anyone's actually interested in it. But it is, I think, really interesting. And I looked at it a couple of years ago, and then I looked at it very, very recently. We'll zoom in to the UK and let it catch up. And so if we come up to where I live up here, you think there's going to be no crops up by where Diane lives, and you'd be absolutely right. There's virtually none. All the green is just grass, bit of maize. If you go over towards where Francine lives, it's somewhere, I don't know where she actually lives, but I know the Vague area. You can see there's barley, there's vegetables, there's wheat, there's barley again. There is sugar beet.
What's that you've got on then?
It's map.onesoil.ai, and it's not very, very recent data. Oh, is that a chargeable one? Oh, I won't fill in the form at the moment, but apparently you could. But this tells you what they planted in the fields. This is 2018. And it will give you an idea of what was around then. If you presumably fill in the form to see what was there last year, you get more recent data.
Diane?
Yes, Paul?
I actually went on this site a few times and actually applied to them, and they never got back to me, and I've never had it updated.
Right. Oh, it might be you've got to pay for it. I suspect that might be the case. But it's really interesting if you look at where you are. This bit fairly near me was interesting because cereals somebody's got a little tiny field of cereals next to quite a big patch of vegetables and barley. And I just thought it was quite interesting. And surprisingly enough, there is nothing there on the top of the peaks.
What's it called? One soil?
There wouldn't be, would there? There's no crops up there.
No. It's map.onesoil.ai. I will put it on the Facebook page.
Lovely.
But you can then look at your area and see what crops they normally have.
Oh, you were near me then. I saw Sisset.
Sisset.
I saw Sisset fly past.
You're fairly close to Scotland up there, aren't you?
No.
What, in Oldham? It feels like it's sometimes.
That's Rotherham. You're down. You're down.
I don't know anything you have not, but you think you know cold and wet, but you don't.
Exeter's Barnsley, not
But look how pretty it is. It's beautiful.
Where?
Everywhere, all the little sparkly bits. It's lovely. But I just thought it was really interesting to see how croppy some areas are. And if you live round here, the chances are in their crop rotation, the crop rotation stays fairly similar. So you will have wheat and oilseed rape and barley and things. And it's the oilseed rape beekeepers are most interested in because of the large honey crop you'll get.
What's the pink ones, Diane?
The pink potatoes.
Oh.
Now, I always understood that bees don't go on potatoes, and this is from my very limited experience of being very aware of bees as a beekeeper and not when I used to live in the middle of the countryside when I was a kid and spent my days walking around fields looking at plants and things. But a bee farmer from Potato House, Andrew Skay, tells me very reliably that bees do grow on potatoes, and shared some photos on Twitter with me. And to be honest, they were bumblebees, but it was still interesting to see bumblebees.
They do go on
growing
bees,
potato
yeah.
flowers.
What's the black stuff?
The black is nothing, or
No, there's very, very black spots. See just down beside Marlow to the right.
oh
Yeah.
right, yeah, it's just not showing up. It
My
might.
daughter just lives south of there.
Does
It's,
she?
it's probably tarmac.
It's not registered as a crop field, I think.
Just between Bishop and Cookham there, yeah, just on that road there.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm not grass.
So
Wave
grass,
to her.
that's no good. The grass will, if it's got animals on, will very rarely have any flowers on that are any good for bees.
What do we think about field beans?
Yeah, they're supposed to be quite good. I don't think I've seen any on this chart yet.
Well, they have extra floral nectaries, don't they?
Yeah.
Because I'm surrounded by also rape and field beans, and a couple of nectar fields for conservation value.
If the grass has got clover in, then that can be a really good crop. And there used to be a lot of clover, but I'm afraid the patches of grass on our street, as soon as the clover appears, it's like an alarm goes off in the grass cutter man's head, and off he comes with his lawnmower thing to come and kill it all.
That's what that article that I put in the chat from the BBC was about, comparing pollen in honey from 1952, I think it was.
That.
Oh yeah, it's really interesting, that, isn't it? Alfalfa.
You know,
that's very good, but
we have that in our nectar field.
Yeah, you can plant that, but that must be really nice to get that near your bees.
You know, on the bee unit, just slightly changing the subject, is it the bee net something? Is there somewhere where you can see where other hives are that may have hives near you?
There is a very rough calculator that tells you how many apiaries are within 10 kilometres of you. And to be honest, last time I looked, I couldn't actually find it. Let me see if I can log in and see if I can find it. You should all be registered on BeeBase, by the way.
Well, I will be when I get some bees. But I'm curious to know if there's any other hives within a mile or two of where mine are going to be.
Right, I will share it now.
I don't know if there's a way to find out that exact, Graham.
No.
If you see this is my colony, my apiary ID.
All right.
I don't know why it says one colony there at all. And actually, that might be my home one. Yeah, it might be. I'm not monitoring for Asian hornet. If I was, I can tick a box in my apiary details. But the number of other apiaries within a 10-kilometre radius is 262. And you think, oh my God, that's a huge, huge number. And it would be really interesting. And maybe this is homework. And on Wednesday, you can all tell me what numbers you've got. It sounds a really big area, but if I do a radius of 10 kilometres, it's a huge, huge area. It really is.
And is that on BeeBase?
That's on BeeBase. When I log in.
Can I register on BeeBase even though I haven't got my bees yet?
Yes.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Yes. And the MBU will upload their records there. And if you want, you can add your personal notes on there. Oh, right. Yes, there's the allotment one. Well spotted, Mike. I have 5 colonies in there, and there were, the last time Dave edited it, 4 other beekeepers sharing, and there's not now. There's 3 in total, so we have lost a beekeeper. But yeah, a 10-kilometre area is an absolutely massive space.
Surely it should only be 4 kilometres, because that's as far as they fly.
They don't want to give you any sort of information that might inadvertently actually tell you anything useful. And it's like, if there's foul brood in your area, they don't write the postcode down exact. They've divided the country into these lumps, and you get to know what lump it's in. And you can look it up. And I know when there was foul brood in our apiary, that the lump actually looks like it's not here. And it's just because they don't actually want to identify someone, because it's down to you whether you tell anyone there's been foul brood in your apiary. But one of the reasons for saying, yes, we've had foul brood in our apiary is because it wasn't our fault. It isn't anything a beekeeper's done to get foul brood other than accept bees from someone who's given you bees that were poorly. And it can take 3 or 4 years to appear, because those spores are very good at hiding in honey for 30 years for AFB. So you could have a colony for 30 years, and on the 30th year of you having it, you know, you suddenly they get to the last bit of honey in a frame that came with them. I mean, it wouldn't, because you'd have probably binned a brood frame by then. But the chances are, if when they get to that spore, that infects them, and after a couple of months, it's prevalent in the colony enough for you to notice.
Bacterial spores can survive for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
Possibly even thousands. They think they may have found some in the mummies in the tombs.
Yeah, there was a really interesting article I was reading by NBU about the EFB in the London area, and showing the clusters of it and the number of colonies affected. And it ties in sort of with the lack of forage in London, which is why it's sort of relevant to tonight's talk. If you don't have sufficient forage in your area, your bees can't get through EFB. Whereas if they're really, really well fed, the larvae don't starve to death, because the bees can keep piling in food because there's loads of it. If they don't have loads of food to feed the larvae, that's when it becomes really obvious you've got it. And it can wax and wane as the colony manages to bring in enough food. It'll sort of disappear, and it's still actually there, but it's only when the colony is feeling fragile because it's starving a bit itself that you notice the larvae are dying and have died. But this clustering of it's fairly obvious that part of the problem they have in London is a lot of beekeepers who aren't aware of what EFB is, because there'll be pockets of it that get left behind, because, you know, if you're not on the NBU bee base list, they don't know to come and check your hives, and you might actually have been infected by, you know, your bees robbing out a local colony or something. So be on bee base, make sure there's loads of food for your bees, and hopefully you'll never ever see foul brood outside of a disease death. When the NBU, they all have special licenses to actually allow them to bring the frames along, and so then you can look at them and smell them.
A little bit on that, even though they were registered on BBase and with the BBKA, I didn't have an inspector turn up last year. Is that normal, that they'll just look up at some point this year then? Or
no, you might go 15, 20 years before ever having an inspection.
Oh, okay, so it's not an annual thing then?
No. If you have concerns about how healthy your bees are, if you think you've got a foul brood, by all means ring them up and say, I'm seeing this in my hive, can you come and have a look? And they will make an appointment, they will come and have a look and put your mind at peace, because it'll just be a bit of dodgy brood that's actually chalk brood or something. But they're quite happy to come out to false alarms, just as they want to come out when you are genuinely concerned, and it's nothing to be ashamed about. Right, good night, Steve.
Good night, Steve.
Not everybody. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Night, Steve.
I'm thinking of calling the inspector out to mine in the summer. Just have a cast his professional eye over, give us some pointers.
If they are very busy, they may try and put you off a bit.
Just have an ask.
Yeah, you can ask. When our apiary was at the one side of the allotment, one of the beekeepers, the one who did the horrible thing with the nuke, she threatened one of the beekeepers, I'm going to get the bee inspector on you, because she knew him in effect socially. So anyway, we said that's absolutely fine. Ring him. We'd love to have him come round. And at that point she went, he's busy. So anyway, one of the other beekeepers, didn't take kindly to being threatened and rang the bee inspector up and said, would you like to come have a nice cup of tea and have a look at our bees? So he did. And he was really nice. And he said, I can't tell you what she said to me, but I can tell you what I said to her. And so we knew exactly what she'd been whinging about, which was quite funny because it was what we suspected it was. Someone had bought bees in from his friend in Wales who breeds really nice queens. And she really didn't like that because they were from quite a long way away, which is a very understandable sort of thing to be concerned about. But he is actually a professional queen rearer and, you know, really good queens. So anyway, this is the EFB positive cases article I was looking at. Yes, no, it was today I was looking at it. And there's these sort of clusters that indicate, you know, if you were the bee inspector and all the orange ones were actually one beekeeper, or they'd all come from one source, then that really explains why they're all, you know, in that area. It might be someone's bred bees and sold some on, and that's what that locations are. The 2 and the 5 in the yellow, you know, 5 will be presumably the whole of someone's apiary. But you start to think about, I know London's absolutely enormous really, but when you sort of narrow it down into little chunks, there's going to be masses of beekeepers in these areas. And that's when the forage is really sort of stretched, especially when the weather's really hot and dry. Or the council do terrible things like they did in Sheffield, was it, where they cut lots of really mature trees down. And that for me is really awful because a tree is such a massive crop to lose for your bees. But I thought that was really interesting. And this is an article on MBU showing this is the outbreaks of EFB. The different variations of it. And it tells you what the MLST types are. And I know from when they found the AFB with us, when we told them where we'd got the bees from, he did confirm that they had an outbreak of AFB in the area these bees had come from. And actually the guy who'd given the bees to my friend John had actually worked in this area, and absolutely tons of kit had got burnt up there because it was all riddled with the AFB. So it was no surprise that this colony, when he knew where it had come from, it was like, it's sort of a nod from them that yes, this isn't just a new outbreak they didn't know anything about. It was a tail end of an outbreak they dealt with the previous year. And the guy should have actually said, oh yeah, I took some home to Manchester and gave a colony away. And I know, he's probably given a couple of other colonies away from what he'd said. But they can track it down if they know where it is. And if you sell bees, you should probably write notes in your MBU thing to say, this is the person I've sold it to, and get that new person to write where they've got their bees from. Because then there's just all the traceability of, if there ever is a problem with your bees, and hopefully there never will be, then it's all traceable. And
they quarantine an area?
Yes, they do. If you think you've got AFB, you effectively put your own standstill on the apiary, and you take really good hygiene measures at that moment in time. So you'll be really careful to get rid of your gloves. You'll burn them or wash them really well and get rid of them. Wash all your hive tools, make sure all your bee suits are washed, and anyone who's in the apiary with you has to do the same. But you don't take any kit out of that apiary then until you've been given the all clear. And then I think it's 3 years of inspections after that, just to check. After they've got rid of the hive that's got the positive result, they come and keep checking the others.
You see, I'm surprised there is very little traceability in bees when you think of other livestock. And
you can't
I know
get the tags in their ears.
No, and
the drones
it's not
just
that,
hop around.
But when you think how important bees are, and how easy it is to spread from one apiary to another, and yet there's no traceability at all.
There
Really?
are some countries, I think, that force you to register when you keep bees, and there are some states in the US where you have to register before you can get bees, and that's sort of seems a bit mean, but it would be a good thing to do. But the thing that I can do is I can say to you is register on BeeBase, make sure all your apiaries are registered, pay attention to disease and know what you're looking for, and then when you do have a problem, get in touch with the bee inspector and they'll come and say, well spotted, Graham, you've got a bit of sackroot and it's nothing to worry about, or oh my god, who did you get your bees off? And there should never be any shame in that, because you know it's not bad beekeeping as such that gets your bees a bad disease. It is
no, but you
they
see,
come with it.
If you're on private land, you can buy bees. You don't have to register with BeeBase. You don't have to be in a local association. You don't even have to have insurance if it's your own. You know, there seems to be very little regulatory. Most people, it's voluntary and it's sensible, and most people do it. But there is no regulation really.
No, well, other than the sensible people, the nice people will always register. And if you know someone who hasn't registered, then you could always say to the bee inspector, I know he keeps 3 hives and he's not listed on MBU. It's one of those things. If we went to the other extreme and you had to be registered, then they have to get the at the moment they would have to go away and get a warrant to come in. They can show you their warrant card and ask to come in, but if you actually said no and you had a big gate, then they've got to go to a judge and say, I'd like to go and look at this guy's bees because he's in an area with foul brood.
I've got to go.
Right, Mark.
Bye, everyone.
Good night, Mark. Good night.
Yeah, I'm going to head off. Thanks, Diane.
Right. Good night, Mike.
I thought the warrant cards the NBU have are actually better than police warrant cards, and they can insist on entry.